Hello, in this snip, I would like to talk about how to manage Hyper-V virtual disks with PowerShell. First off, some prereqs. We just need a Hyper-V host. In this case, I'm going to be using Windows Server 2016, and we really don't have any snip suggestions that are really closely related to this snip. So first thing we have to do is let's just create a VHD to get started. So to do that, we use the New-VHD command that's part of the Hyper-V PowerShell module. And in case I didn't mention, we are remoted in via PowerShell remoting directly to my Hyper-V host. So you can see there in the terminal that I'm remoted to an IP address. That is my Hyper-V host actually in Azure. Okay, so first thing we do is if you need to do anything else, since we can't cover every little parameter that has attached to the New-VHD command, always refer to get help and the detailed help as well. There's lots of different commands that we can do here. Be sure to reference those if you need to. All right, so start off with, let's first see if a VHD exists. So I'm going to create a VHD called myvm.vhdx, and I'm going to put it in the PowerLab VHDs folder. So notice that is not there. All right, to create a VHD, it's pretty simple. Specify the path, how many gigs that you want the VHD to be, and in this case, it's going to be 50 gigabytes and 10 gigabytes, and I'm going to make them both dynamic because I really don't want to allocate all that size at once. All right, so I'm just going to create two VHDs. All right, when I do that, notice that it does return some properties of the VHD. Right now, we don't really want this, but we can check and see if it is created, and that one is not created because notice that I have the path of 50 and the path of 10. I changed the name of those actually. So now I will just go ahead and just update this, run it again, and then now you can see that it's true. So it did actually create the myVM 50, and if you don't believe me, we can actually run the 10 as well just to see, and that one is true as well, so no problem there. All right, so we just created a simple disk. PowerShell can also create diff disk or differencing disk. So a differencing disk is when the VM applies changes, it only applies changes to the child disk. So then the parent disk stays intact and you can just reuse that however you need to. To create a diff disk in PowerShell, we use New-VHD. We can specify the path of the child disk or the diff disk, specify the parent path of the parent that will be created, and then we're going to be using the switch parameter of differencing here to create it. So I will go ahead and do this. That created a differencing disk called myvm-diff. And since it's a parent-child relationship, the child of the previous parent can actually be a parent in and of itself as well. So now I'm going to create another one. We're going to create two levels here. So we have a diff disk. We have a grandchild, I guess if you will, called myvm diff child. Then that parent is called myvm diff, and then that parent is called myvm 50. You'll see why I did this here in a minute. All right, so that creates diff disks. We can use the get VHD command to enumerate different information about VHDs. VHDX is going to be sitting on the file system. We can look for information at the file level, but we can actually also use the get VHD command to enumerate different information about it. So that's how you would inspect existing VHDs. All right, next up is let's talk about how we can change VHDs. Again, using help, the Set-VHD is the command that we use. Using help that you can get all the different parameters and things that you can do with this. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and change the, a physical sector size. I really don't need to do anything like here, but that gives you an example of just choose one of those parameters that you need and just go ahead and run it. Very, very simple. Next up is maybe I want to find the diff disk parent path. So this is the example that I'm going to be using in this snip. So if you recall, I created the myvm-diff VHDX, that VHD file, and its parent path should be myvm 50. Okay, we can see that by using get VHD. Now we can see that the myvm 50 VHDX is its parent, so it has part of the parent path. But that doesn't tell us what the parent of that parent is. It's not recursive. I've created a simple function here called get diff disk parent with a path parameter. Once you provide that path parameter, it goes through, checks and see if there's a parent on that original path, and if there is, it outputs it, and then it recursively enumerates all of the different grandchildren, children, parent, all the way up as far as you can. So it walks the tree all the way up. So to explain how this works, I will bring it into my session here, and then I will run it, and then now you can see that it outputs my VM diff, which is the parent of that original diff child, and then it returns my VM50, which is the parent of that. So using this simple function, you can spruce this up however you need to, but I just give you an example of using a while loop there in PowerShell to recursively see all this information. All right, next up, let's talk about assigning a VHD to the VM. So now, if I have a VM created, I don't know if I have one called my VM or not. I believe these are actually, this is called SRV1, but let's just make sure. Get VM, yes, we have SRV1, 2, and 3. All right, so let's change that to SRV1. So let's say that I have one created. I'll just go ahead and do the my VM50 one. And I want to add the disk to a VM. So I want to install the operating system on it, get it going or whatnot. I can just call the add VM hard disk drive past the VM object that get VM returns, and then now the VHD is assigned to that VM. I can then check by using get VM hard disk drive, and it doesn't exist because I didn't update this one. So now the VHD is associated with that VM. So that's how you would assign that, using get and add VM hard disk drive. All right, next up we can detach it. So let's say we want to detach the virtual disk from SRV1 that we just created. We can simply use remove hard disk drive. And let's see here, the input object cannot be bound to any parameters. All right, let's do some troubleshooting here. SRV1. Okay, this is an example of sometimes when the pipeline, see me intuitively, I would think that the get VM and it would just automatically know what the hard disk of that is. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So what we have to do here is we have to get the VM object, and then we have to run get VM hard disk drive, and then pass it to remove hard disk drive to actually get this removed. So let's see if this works. Okay, so that worked. So in that case, you cannot pass the VM object directly to remove VM hard disk drive. All right, so that removes that association. And then if you wanted to remove it completely, you can even just use remove item, remove it directly from the disk. So it's not a big deal there at all. All right, so next up, I've just created a couple functions here like I tend to do. I've created one called New-VHD. And this is the function that has a few different parameters here that I've just defined to myself. So I've defined that most of the VHDs that I create are around 50 gigabytes. So I'm setting a default of 50 gigabyte. They're always going to be dynamic by default, and they're always going to be placed in C PowerLab VHD. So this allows me to set some default parameters. And then I have the attach to VM. So this not only creates a new VHD, but also attaches it to the my VM of choice as well, which is kind of cool. And then I'm not going to go down through each of these. This isn't a PowerShell specific step. There's plenty of those in the library. This will all be available to you in the snip scripts Git repo. All right, so I'll show you how this works. Let's bring this into memory. And this works. All right, so let's just call it VHD to make it different. And I want to attach it to a VM called, let's do SRV1. All right, so let's see if this works. I don't actually know. Let's try and see. So it looks like it did. Created new VHD at path, and it attached it to our SRV1 VM. Great, it worked. Okay, let's check and see if it actually did work. So this is going to be SRV1. And then we can pipe that to get VM hard disk drive and my VM VHD. Yep, it worked. Okay, just to demonstrate, let's then remove it. Okay, once it's removed, then let's do it again. We'll change this to my VM VHD again. We attach it and then try this again. And it looks like it worked. Now notice that it didn't actually create it again. Notice here it says created new VHD and then attached it. But now you notice that it says it just attached it. It did that because the VHD was already created. So we're able to add some logic and validation in there. So now it just attached it. But now, let's say we run this again a third time. This means the VHD exists and the VHD is already attached. Let's see what this does. All right, now it just says it's already attached to VM. So we're able to just run this over and over and over again, and it doesn't return any kind of crazy errors. Now let's see what happens when I try to attach it to a VM that doesn't exist. Then notice that it gets a warning. The VM does not exist, unable to attach to VHD. So this function allows me to create a kind of a default functionality and provide a lot of error handling here. This is great if I have to create a bunch of VMs that are all kind of the same. For a lab, for example, and then it also allows me to put in various logging and verbose messages in there as well. All right, so that has been how to manage Hyper-V virtual disks with PowerShell. Thanks a lot.